All right, let's go ahead and get started, seeing that it's 11:32. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the SECOORA's webinar series, Coastal Observing in Your Community. Thank you so much for sharing your lunch hour with us. SECOORA is hosting this webinar series to discuss, highlight, and raise awareness about coastal ocean observing activities in the Southeast U.S. My name is Abby Wakely, SECOORA's Communications Director, and I will be facilitating and moderating the webinar. All participants will be in listen-only mode. You are encouraged to type questions for the presenter or technical questions for me in the right-hand chat box. I will respond to them directly or post the questions to our presenters after their presentation. We are recording this webinar today and will be posting a recording of the webinar along with a PDF of the presentation on the SECOORA website. We are very excited about our lineup of speakers from the Smart Sea Level Sensor Project. We have Kim Cobb from Georgia Tech, Russell Clark from Georgia Tech, Nick Deffley from the Office of Sustainability from the City of Savannah, Emanuele Lorenzo from Georgia Tech, and Jayma Koval from Georgia Tech. They will be presenting the webinar titled Smart Sea Level Sensors for Emergency Planning and Response. All right, Layla, and I want to thank Layla from Georgia Tech for coordinating all these speakers and volunteering your guys' time to present. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and promote you to presenter. If you just give me 1 second, and then you should be able to take over.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to share our slides and we'll get started. All right, just to confirm, can you see the title slide?
Yes, I can.
All right, we'll get started.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for this opportunity to present to this group. I'm really excited to share something about our project, and thanks especially to Lala for setting this up so that we can all be here today. I have a good size of the project team here in this room, and it's exciting to get together and share this project. So I just want to note at the top level that this is a project that's really co-led by myself, Kim Cobb, Russ Clark, who's here in the room from Computer Science at Georgia Tech, Nick Deffley, who's also online from City of Savannah, and Randall Matthews, who couldn't join us today from Chatham Emergency Management Agency. We are kind of the core team and really excited to share something about what we have accomplished to date, our goals, and share something about, I think, what is a pretty unique partnership that has enabled us to go forward under the umbrella of the Georgia Smart Communities Challenge, which is a kind of a funding mechanism from public and private sources that got this project off the ground in August. And we are, as I hope you will see, we're very enthusiastic with where it's going and its service to the community to date and in the future. So just to provide some context for the project, we're really taking aim squarely at coastal flooding hazards along the Chatham County coast. So this is a graph from CEMA, which illustrates the flood vulnerability across different categories of hurricanes. Obviously, this is a zone of acute flooding hazards across these storm surges, but it's not just storm surges, as I'll show you in a minute. It's becoming more of an episodic encounter with coastal flooding for a variety of conditions. But in a macro sense, if you step back and think about beyond the acute hazards of day-to-day flooding or even coastal hazards like storm surges, this is occurring under a baseline of rising global sea levels. This is a plot showing satellite altimetry data for global sea levels over the last, going back to 1993. And so this is something that we know is going to continue and stands to accelerate going forward. Current rates are about 3.2 millimeters per year over this time frame. If we zero down to Fort Pulaski down on the coast, this is NOAA's only tide gauge across the Georgia coast. You can see that this is a record that contains a lot more variability to it, but nonetheless, the trend is very similar to the global average at 3.2 millimeters per year, very similar. This local sea level rise has amounted to about 10 inches over the last 85 years, and again, projected to continue to go up with those really high peaks are acute variability and hazards usually caused by storm surges. If we want to look at what's ahead for the Georgia coastline, as well as many other sea level vulnerable areas across the world, you're looking at a range that's really been newly updated by working groups that have been chewing on the science of global sea level rise for NOAA. This is a technical report that just came out, was also featured in the National Climate Assessment that just came out as well in November, so I refer interested folks to those updated numbers. But the projections for sea level rise have increased significantly since the last big assessment report in 2013 by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So you can see these scenarios going up to 2 meters now, just to change metrics on you here, 2 meters over the next 100 years or so, depending on the emissions trajectories, the red, of course, being those high trajectories on the extreme side, up to over 2 meters. And so the main uncertainties here are emissions pathway, which is in the different colors, as well as the response of large ice sheets to warming, which could be fairly accelerated through the next decades as the ice sheets play catch up with current warming, for example. So this is also folded into these uncertainty estimates as best as we can. If we look at what that means for Fort Pulaski, we're looking at scenarios where these episodic flooding events become much, much more frequent. So the number of days per year approaching every day per year in an extreme scenario of coastal flooding. But obviously, even on the best case scenario, looking at half of the year or more facing coastal flooding days. And those extreme scenarios for global sea level rise are well over 50 inches by 2100. That's again from those technical report in the National Climate Assessment. So this is not just a now-term threat, it's a growing threat, and it's something that coastal communities are going to have to get ahead of. And it's not just storm surges either. This is a picture that Russ Clark took back in Thanksgiving, where we had just a wind direction pushing water across different embankments across the Chatham County coastline, and what we call something that's been referred to as blue sky flooding, which has become a lot more common. We've seen articles even this week from Miami in the New York Times all the way up through Charleston, of course, huge vulnerabilities across the entire southeastern sector for this kind of blue sky flooding. And so this is really where our project enters. We have a website where you can go get a huge wealth of information about where we've been and a little bit about where we're going. There's an FAQ. There's integrated tools that people can access there as well. But this kind of lists the full project team. And in the interest of time, I won't go over every one of these lists from Georgia Tech, SEMA, and Savannah. But suffice it to say that we have pretty deep benches across these 3 core agencies and entities that are forming the nexus of this partnership that's been so incredibly fruitful and so incredibly fun to work on down on the coast with these lovely, amazing partners. So just to outline our key project goals here, we're obviously taking aim at emergency planning and response. That was really the impetus for our initial partnership. We reached out to SEMA as well as City of Savannah, and really thrilled with Nick Deffley and Randall Matthews helping us crystallize some of our goals in this area and make sure that we are serving the community with the project in this first most important category of goals for the project. The second thing is to keep in mind that while we're focused on short-term risk assessments and planning and risk mitigation, we're really also want to keep in mind the long-term risk assessment frameworks and longer-term resilience planning so that the community can recognize the growing threat of sea level rise and try to get ahead of it as they can. And as we'll share today, we also have developed some educational resources and curricula development in partnership with Jayma Koval, who's going to speak in a minute, on how we can partner with middle and high schools down on the coastline to raise awareness and create learning opportunities for those students down there. And then last but not least, so much of this project is about communication and building awareness in a community with these acute hazards already baked in. It's really important to have an integrated assessment or integrated approach to community engagement that recognizes the potential for the community to get involved in protecting itself from these coastal flooding emergencies and raising awareness around planning and resources and responses to keep people safe. And so this is an example of a community engagement activity that we had on January 22nd down in Brunswick, where you can see a lot of people up out there on the stage from Coastal DNR, Jill Gamble from UGA, some civil engineers, and a banker, and a city infrastructure planner from Brunswick, talking about what coastal flooding means and how the communities across the coast of Georgia have been addressing it and what more can be done. A very important start on a series of conversations that I know will continue. An extremely enthusiastic community in attendance that day. So that's an example of an event that we are thrilled to participate in. And now I'm going to turn it over to Russ Clark for his overview of the sensors and the technology that we're using to make this all possible.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us to hear about our project. We're very excited with both the opportunity to engage in the community and to work on solving some very real problems that we're all facing together. I'm going to talk a little bit about the technology side. We have developed and begun deployment of our sensor technology that we're using to monitor with this primary use case of water level. We're using an ultrasonic sensor that measures, basically allows us to install above the water, designing for both ease of maintenance and ease of installation. You can see an example there in the bottom picture of one that's installed on a dock at the Coffee Bluff Marina in Savannah. And then on the right there, some pictures of what it looks like inside as we assemble them and get them ready for deployment. We currently have 8 in the field, 4 in process of installation, 8 gateways, which I'll talk more about in a second, and 30 sensors in production with an ambitious goal of getting as many deployed by the heart of the next hurricane season as possible so that we have lots of visibility. Those 4 that I mentioned in the previous slide are being installed on some bridges that we've been working to get access to and support, and one of the important things about this project is the community engagement at so many, and the agency engagement at so many different levels, including working with GDOT to get approval to do installations on some of the state-owned and maintained bridges, and that is beginning as we speak. The number of sensors in that previous picture goes up weekly at this point as we move forward. We're currently monitoring the water level and air temperature with each deployment, and we have planned additional target sensor values with including water, seawater properties, as well as air quality, and very interested in not just the presence on the coast, but moving inland, including not just rivers and streams, but intersections where thunderstorm events cause roads to be impassable and things like that. So it's a bigger opportunity than just the current installations. As part of this project, we're leveraging a new wireless technology called LoRaWAN that's designed specifically for the Internet of Things application space that we're in. What this gives us is really low power, really long battery life, access and support, but it does require that we deploy some infrastructure to support that. And that's, so as part of the project, we're deploying these gateways that you can see a picture here of the actual gateway hardware inside, and then the antenna that gets mounted outside that gives us the coverage that we need to support the project. And so we're deploying that infrastructure across Chatham County at this point. And the most important thing from the point of view of viability and practical use of this ultimately is that it's not just, this infrastructure will not be just for this application, and we have lots of opportunity for sensor activity and sensor deployments working with the community that will leverage this infrastructure once it's in place. Sort of in summary, the sensor we've designed and developed and working with the community to deploy, very high precision measurement, goal of no maintenance once it's installed, and very long battery life, at least 3 years, and extremely relative to other options that are out in the market today, a very low price point. The material that goes into the sensor is under. We've managed to keep that under. Been able to keep that under $300 per unit. Jayma will be talking a little bit more about educational partnerships in a moment, but I wanted to end this section with a note that the current batch of sensors that we're building, we're actually working with a local high school in Savannah, Jenkins High School, and the students are actually, we delivered the parts last week, and the students are working on learning and honing their engineering skills as part of the assembly, and also very much involved in design to help us design the next generation of sensors that will get deployed. So we're very excited about that partnership, and looking forward to what they come up with. The one last thing, a couple of things on what you can see with the data today. We have deployed an initial dashboard showing some of the giving access to the data from the sensors and showing some of the locations we've installed, and then we can drill down and actually see the data, historical, and navigate through that and see it in context. This is just a demonstration at this point. We have a lot more coming in terms of the applications and portals for the different community members.
Abby, would you mind elevating onto presenter mode, and I'll stop sharing the screen from here.
Okay. All right, so you should be moving into presenter mode, Emanuele.
I just have to share content desktop.
Correct. There we go, and I see the title slide. Perfect.
Very good, thank you. And I will just briefly talk about the modeling component of this project, and in particular something that right now we call the SWITCH, which stands for the Savannah Water Integrated Tool for Ocean, Coastal, and River Hydraulics Forecasting. This modeling component is a shared effort with a group at Georgia Tech, but also a group in Europe, the Center for Mediterranean Studies, and here are some of the people listed on the left-hand side, and also the University of Bologna. So without moving forward, the goal of the modeling is to essentially model and forecast water level changes at the scale where people live. And what you're seeing here in Google Map is an animation showing the current modeling grid, and what you're seeing here is the water depth as we zoom in into essentially the port of Savannah. And so this model reaches essentially a resolution of about 10 meters, which would be several grid points across the river here. And so let me show you a little bit more about the actual grid. So the 10-meter point would be about the size of that dot or smaller. So you can see that we are actually able to really resolve a lot of the circulation of these rivers. And this is the actual computational grid where we solve essentially, we estimate water levels, and we can zoom in at different resolutions where you can see that the density of this grid just increases to achieve maximum resolution in these rivers. And so this is, you can see here, this triangular shaped grids. So moving forward, the first operation of the modeling team was to essentially generate some daily forecasts. And in particular, we're trying to forecast water level, temperature, salinity, and in the future, we would also like to forecast humidity and precipitation so that we could have an entire assessment of not just the water environment, but also the atmospheric conditions in the case of events where you have extreme precipitation and also perhaps heat waves in combination with anomalous sea level. With that said, this is just a simple animation showing you the tidal cycles as the model captures them, and of course it's flickering up and down because this is kind of in a day you get several tides. But let's move forward and show you some snapshots from the actual real-time forecasting system that we currently have posted online, and here's the link. And what is shown in these figures, on the top corner here, we are plotting essentially the forecast for the currents, and down below, if you were on the online portal, you have these red tabs that allow you to essentially look at the forecast at different times. So this is the currents, we have temperatures, we have sea level shown here, and then we have salinity. With that said, though, let's move forward and let's look at a particular point to see how well we do with these forecasts. And so here I decided to pick Fort Pulaski, which is at the mouth of the Savannah River. And this is essentially the forecast for today. And what you're seeing here is the surface current and water levels. And this is Fort Pulaski right here. I don't know if you can see my mouse. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take essentially a time series of the tides at this particular sea level station, which is available at Fort Pulaski. And so in the current picture, the red here is essentially the predicted forecast for the tides from the model. And you can see we have a forecast for today at noon and for tomorrow. And the black is the observations. And you can see that in terms of tides, this model does a pretty good job in capturing what's going on. However, as you know, when we talk about Savannah and we talk about water levels, these are really the results of complex interactions between the land hydrology and the coastal ocean. So we cannot just model the ocean, but we also have to understand the hydrology and the land surface cycle of water. So with that said, what I showed you today is this first implementation of the water model. This is a coastal model with the high resolution. And we're now currently working on trying to couple this model with essentially a regional atmosphere and land hydrology model, which can provide essentially forecasts and also dynamics of precipitation and how this precipitation is routed through the complex land. As you can see here, a picture of the river in the background. It's pretty complex with all the marshes. Essentially try to resolve those dynamics and couple it with the coastal model so we could really have a fully integrated, what we would refer to as a regional earth system model that allows us to really understand the changes in water level from the different sources, both extreme precipitation as well as storm surges and tides coming from the ocean. Ultimately, the real goal is to have the output of these models interface with what we call urban flooding models that allow us to place infrastructure, for example, in the case of the city of Savannah, to really understand how, for example, high sea level events coming from different, mechanisms end up, essentially infiltrating into the city and affecting infrastructure. And so this is very important, of course, because this is what planners, information that planners and coastal communities are interested in understanding. And so with that said, these type of integrated modeling tools together with the sea level sensor network that Russ talked about, and together with other scientists that you will hear about in the future, we're essentially trying to develop what we call a smart coastal area resilient planning tool, which we call SCARP, which is currently more in the form of a proposal at NSF, and hopefully some of you are the reviewers and give us good scores. But the idea is that we will integrate these tools to come up with a framework for really planning resilience in these coastal areas. And this framework will ultimately not just include sea level sensors and models, but will also include the input from people. So this is all I have. Thank you very much.
Abby, could you switch back presenter mode to me, please? So Lala's here.
Yeah. And Emanuele, while we're doing that, kind of Ward had a question. He's asking if the grid you use is similar to the NOAA Takari grid used by NOAA Co-op.
Is it if we're using an unstructured triangular grid, and I'm not familiar with this other grid, so if they're using an unstructured triangular grid, then I presume it's pretty straightforward. It's a pretty standard type of unstructured grid.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Hi, I'm Jayma Koval, and along with my colleague Alex Robel, we are working on ways to connect the Sea Level Sensors Project with K-12 education. Currently, I'm developing a week-long curriculum module for middle school earth science, which in Georgia is taught in the 6th grade, that connects student experiences with local phenomena with grade level content. So the topics that will be included in the grade level, in the week-long curriculum for science content include tides, sea level rise, coastal flooding, and climate change. And it also integrates some of the math curriculum that they learn in the same grade level, statistics and probability, including statistical measures and centers of variability. The curriculum is going to leverage a lot of material, including the Smart Sea Level Sensors Project itself, which is a perfect intersection of science, technology, and society, which students read about and hear about in their science classes, but they don't see it happening live. It's also going to include authentic Smart Sea Level Sensors data, as well as historical Fort Pulaski data for data visualization exercises and data analysis. It's going to include Georgia Climate Stories videos, which show the impacts of coastal flooding in the Savannah and Tybee Island area, and that will be particularly useful for students outside of the region that will be engaging with the curriculum, since they're not living the coastal flooding experiences personally. The videos will take them there. It's also going to include NASA JPL activities on sea level rise, which will be adapted to be useful for this particular grade level, and will also be expanded to be more inquiry-based. The curriculum is going to be piloted at the end of April at a partner school in Savannah, at Oglethorpe Charter School. The teacher that we're partnering with has agreed to implement the curriculum, provide a lot of feedback about how well it worked in the curriculum, provide that feedback to me via surveys and interviews, and then I'll be able to complete revisions of the curriculum over the summer with the hope that the curriculum will be available to be disseminated around the region.
Nick, do you want to take it from here?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So good morning, everyone. Yeah, Nick Deffley with the City of Savannah. I'm the Sustainability Director at the city, and as has already been mentioned, you know, Savannah, Chatham County is a low-lying coastal community. In the last 3 years, we've had 3 hurricanes come through Georgia, and 2 of them have directly impacted Savannah and Chatham County. That's Hurricane Matthew and Hurricane Irma. They both required evacuation. The last major evacuation for us was Hurricane Floyd in 1999, which presented a lot of other logistical challenges. But and then last year we had Hurricane Michael come through, which significantly impacted Georgia agriculture through the southwestern part of the state. Didn't hit Savannah at all. However, what I think that has done more recently, plus a lot of the national, regional, and international news, is really put the concept of, and the concepts of storm surge, king tide events, inundation, stormwater flooding, more and more into the day-to-day awareness of our community. And so this opportunity has really come at a very appropriate time for Savannah and Chatham County. Our mayor, Mayor DeLoach, has been very much from the beginning, as Kim mentioned, in support of this project, and our city leadership as well. They're looking at it from 2 main areas. One, of course, is that emergency response and management. But longer term, also, we expect this data that we're gathering now through this new system to help inform our infrastructure planning, how we prioritize our infrastructure projects, what that looks like, building resilience into that, and then also helping inform our longer term capital planning for those infrastructure projects and built environment projects. So there are a few contributions that I think the City of Savannah has focused more on as a partner in this grant. First one is around community engagement and partnership. We, of course, are here every day working with our residents. One of the key organizations that we have partnered with is an organization, a nonprofit called Harambe House. That is headed by Dr. Mildred McLean, who, Harambe House and Dr. McLean have had a long-term relationship and have been a fixture of this community, focused on environmental justice and social equity. They also have long-standing trusted relationships among the African American residents in the community and focus specifically really on underserved and marginalized communities within Savannah and the whole region. So they are a key partner that we have brought into this to help start to really take what we're learning through this project, and as we develop more of the online tools, reaching out to the community and engaging with them in what this data means to them and making it relevant for them. So that's one key partnership that we have helped bring into this. And then another is more health related. We have two organizations that focus on human health here in Savannah. One is the Coastal Georgia Indicators Coalition, which is more of a collaborative dashboard of a variety of measurements on key health indicators within Savannah and our residents. The other organization is Healthy Savannah, which is a collaboration, again, a nonprofit that brings in cross-sectoral disciplines and organizations to focus on human health. And they focus on it not from a programmatic standpoint, but more from a policy and systems and environmental change area, so that they can positively impact key human health indicators. And I bring this up because I think this comes into the larger picture of the application and the true impact to our communities. Is they look at the intersections of health and the environment, health and public safety, health and how all of our built environment impacts our community. And so there is going to be, I think, over time, a lot of ways to leverage those relationships that we already have here with this project and help disseminate that information to the public. And this is all very significant for the city of Savannah. For those of you who do not know, Savannah has struggled with a 25% poverty rate for the last 30 years. So 1 in 4 Savannahans lives at or below the poverty line here. And we are focused on how the data that we're gathering now and the modeling that we can start to show how that data is disseminated through the community in ways that are accessible and relevant for those who are already struggling in their day-to-day lives with just other issues and other topics. So there are no assumptions made about how we get this information out and how people can access the information. So we are going to do a lot over time in making sure that this information is relevant and accessible for everyone. Sensor and gateway hosts, Russ already talked about that, but certainly through the City of Savannah and Chatham County, any infrastructure that belongs to our municipalities, we are certainly making sure that's open to hosting these sensors or hosting some of the gateways and the backbone infrastructure for this. The city is also interested in what additional sensor applications could be. So we have these sensors that are in prototype, and this is really exciting. We're also thinking about how those same sensors could potentially be used. In Savannah, we have in the summer every afternoon we have a 5 o'clock thunderstorm that hits hard for 30 minutes, and we've got a foot of water in many of our intersections and our streets. So could we potentially transfer some of the same technology to an intersection or to intersections and have real-time kind of traffic avoidance to make sure that we're missing those intersections that are flooded? So we're interested in, what can we do with this larger system and how can we apply it in different ways that are beneficial to the community? And then finally, just the way that this program, I think, will really help support our larger coastal resilience efforts. We are in the process of forming a resilience network with Savannah and Chatham County and perhaps the region. It's still in its infancy, but looking at resilience from a climate standpoint, of course, resilience within our community, resilience in our economy, and how we start planning again and building for these larger events or regular inundation, and how we need to modify the way we live or adapt in order to thrive here. And so that's one area where I think we are really looking to help inform. And then the last is, again, going back to the residents in many of these communities, especially some of those lower income and marginalized communities who don't necessarily have the resources up front, using this data to help inform neighborhood emergency response plans. And again, cooperating with Harambe House and partnering with them to come in and help this data instigate those emergency response plans for neighborhoods. And with that, we'll stop.
Thanks so much, Nick. This is Kim again, and we have a couple minutes here. I wanted to share, for those of you who may be academic institutions, how we are engaging Georgia Tech undergrads in this project, and we view them as a core component of our project, and we certainly have been amazed with what they have accomplished to date. And Lawless, I will have him speak to that in a second with respect to some of the classes that we're engaging here on campus with the project. But I also want to note, following up on Nick's comments, that part of the Georgia Smart Communities framework is allowing us to place 2 Georgia Tech summer interns paid down on the coast. One will be based with Nick at the City of Savannah, and the other one will be based at SEMA with Randall Matthews, and really help us accelerate some of our more ambitious goals. Obviously, the one who's working with Nick will be really closely trying to advance some of our work around the equity, work with Harrenby House, and the community engagement pieces for those underserved communities and awareness building. So we're very excited about those interns. I think it's a real accelerant to the project and a great model for on-the-ground training for undergraduate students. And I also want to allow Lawless a couple minutes to talk about how he's engaging with classes here at Georgia Tech on the sensor data and visualization side.
Thanks, Kim. So we are working with a junior design class here at Georgia Tech. They're primarily computer science students, and we're working with 2 teams of 5 students each on 2 different apps for how to visualize data and communicate that to Savannah residents. So as Russ mentioned, the data from the sea level sensors is now publicly available. So we want to build tools and visualizations on top of that data that make it useful in different ways. I can briefly describe some of these tools, and these will be up online by April. So just in 2 months they'll be live. But I'll just briefly describe them now. One is a web application that visualizes sensor data over time on a map, similar to what Russ had shown with the dashboard earlier in the presentation. It allows a few more capabilities in terms of not just viewing sensors as well as data that they have recorded in the past, but also a layer on inundation to show which areas might be experiencing flooding based on measurements that are read from the sensor. So that will be up online in March. The second project we're working on is a mobile application that visualizes flood risk scenarios using augmented reality. So augmented reality is a technology that overlays computer graphics onto real-world images or video. And here what we're doing is overlaying floodwater levels on top of real-world images. So if a user opens up this app on their phone and is standing, say, at Savannah City Hall, they could see how high water level would be at their level for different categories of storms, as well as see how high water level was for historical storms like Irma, Matthew, or Michael, Hurricane Irma, Matthew and Michael. So we're working on that as well as an education tool to show what flood risk would be like under different levels, so that people are aware that this is not an isolated incident, but they could be vulnerable under different scenarios, and make that message a little bit more clear. So that app is also going to be live in April. It's going to be for Android for the time being, but based on user feedback, we hope to expand it based on that.
Great. Okay, thanks, Lawless, and I hope we've left plenty of time for questions, and we'd love to take the feedback from this amazing audience.
Great. Thank you guys so much for presenting. That was a wonderful presentation. We do have one question by Helen, and Lawless, you might have answered this. She was curious as to if anyone on the panel has looked at forecasting or communicating impacts as a result of flooding.
Nick, do you want to take that question? I think that's kind of in your wheelhouse with resilience and communication.
The impacts of flooding? Can you say that one more time, please?
Yeah. If you've looked at forecasting or communicating the impacts as a result of flooding.
I know most of what I have seen done, and a lot of that comes through Chatham Emergency Management Agency, has been kind of after the fact. So especially these last few years with the hurricane and Irma specifically had a significant a larger amount of flooding and inundation, we've been able to get the readings on what has been impacted and the different locations that I think they'll be focusing on now, and where we put some of these sensors so we can start getting more real time. But in terms of anything preemptive, no, but we certainly have used the data, and SEMA has been very good at collecting that data, and I think some of that was in one of the first slides here around the impact.
I also wanted to add a comment about the forecasting. We've started some conversations among the group of, when we produce a forecast, there's always an inherent danger that people will trust the forecast, even if we put uncertainties. So we initiated some conversation of how in the future we may want to display forecast information in a way that is benign and still useful.
Great, thanks, Emanuele. And this kind of goes into the question that Melissa Hugh is asking. With regards to the augmented reality mobile app, are you concerned about being too alarmist and how that affects property value?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we are so far treating this as a tool that's based on historical data that's gathered, and if we can gather information based on what Hurricane Irma, Michael, and Matthew actually affected, that is important information to show when you are making a decision about what property you're about to buy. In terms of the view of showing how high water level may be at your location based on the category of storm, I think then that gets into a little bit more of a careful consideration on how that data should be presented. And we are working with our partners at the Savannah Area Geographic Information Systems group, SAGES, to make sure that our model is simple enough that it can be understood, but also accurate enough that it does not raise too many false alarms about issues with property. But it's definitely a good consideration. I'm looking forward to feedback from community members to see what they think about this.
And this is Nick again. I would also like to say that I think, given that span prior to Hurricane Floyd that I mentioned in '99, the common kind of thing you would hear from the community is, oh, well, Savannah is geographically protected along the coast, and hurricanes don't hit here, and storm surges don't hit here. And that has remained true because in Hurricane Floyd, many folks evacuated, but the storm actually did not have a direct impact on Savannah at all. And then moving forward to the last few years, that same conception is still out there. So I think that's something else to consider as we move through that is we certainly don't want to alarm, but we also want to make sure that people have a realistic understanding of how things are changing with our climate and how that's going to impact the coast.
Great, thanks so much. Jim Nelson, he has a question for the team. Have you guys had any interactions with SECOORA, the Coastal Emergency Risk Assessment Modeling, or the Storm Surge Model Group?
Excuse me, could you repeat the question? I didn't understand the name.
Any interactions with SECOORA, which stands for Coastal Emergency Risk Assessment? They do storm surge modeling on the southeast.
I have not, and it's great to hear. I will research it, and if you have some useful links or contacts, it would be extremely valuable.
Absolutely, I'll connect you with them. And then he has another, Jim Nelson has another question. Is the intention to operate in real time through extreme events, and have you all done any system hardening?
Yes, that is absolutely our intention, and yes, recognizing the obvious challenges to that is an important part of the project. In fact, one of we have a lot of proposal activity with different potential sponsors, including National Science Foundation, among others, on this very topic. And one of the proposals we just recently submitted was specifically around research around the designing resilient architectures for the smart cities IoT infrastructure, and in this case, our platform that obviously is critical. In fact, perhaps the most valuable proposition that we have on the table with emergency management and first responders is real-time data about what's going on during the event of the storm. And as part of that, it's all of the usual things like making sure we have backup power and making sure we have the actual hardware and facilities are installed in places that we think will survive. But a big one that I don't think anyone has sufficiently tackled, and is a big part of the goal, is inevitably some portions of the infrastructure will become disconnected from the larger internet, and we need to make sure that those are operable and hopefully still usable. For instance, if you're cut off on Tybee Island and don't have access to the rest of the infrastructure, at least you should be able to see what's going on around you in your neighborhood, right? And so while we aren't prepared to make claims that those problems are solved by any means, that is a very important and recognized design goal, and we pay very serious attention to that as part of the project.
Great, thank you. And then we have another question from CJ Jackson. Is the project team interested in deploying sensors elsewhere on the Georgia coast? He has a few research projects where these sensors would be useful and involve coastal communities. He's a coastal geologist at Georgia Southern University.
Yes.
Yes. So I'll take that and say that we are very, very interested, and so far we've had a lot of interest from individual communities and homeowners and things like that, and that's great. And we're continuing to talk with those folks about how we might get some pilot infrastructure on the ground there. But for people that have active research projects down on the coast, who we can collaborate with much lower barriers to entry and kind of shared goals and a ready-made plug-and-play research framework, we would be really pleased to get some sensors and gateways in folks' hands so that they can leverage and help us understand the potential impacts and synergies of this network for other research programs. So that goes for anybody on the call, actually. If you are involved in coastal research, you think this sensor technology could be uniquely helpful to you, please do reach out directly to either Russ or myself, and we can discuss what that might look like. That's a really great point that we didn't make clearly enough.
Great, thanks so much. And then we have a question from Audra Lusher. She's from NOAA Co-op. Are you considering establishing flood thresholds to track minor, moderate, major flood categories similar to what we have established for NOS gauges? If so, how are you relating the sensor to ground level? Thank you.
That goes in the portal a little bit, right?
So the how relating to ground, what we're doing now is as we do the installations, we are doing a survey to get an accurate elevation so that ultimately the data is useful long-term relative to that, and that we have a ground truth. And so that's the first step of it. I think the second part of the question is much more on the sort of community and education part that Nick and others have talked about here. And I think so we definitely are looking at that and working on that issue, and are very open to community feedback and others on this call. If you have suggestions and examples we should be looking at for how do we relate this information, and how, for instance, are these three categories of low, medium, and high the right, is it, color coded? Is it, what is the right communication mechanism for you know, not overwhelming people with so much data that their eyes glaze over and they ignore it, but giving them, you know, meaningful and actionable. And I think one of the things that we come back to over and over again is why do we want to do so many sensors, and why do we want such a precise model? Is because we want that information and that forecast to be more meaningful and relevant, so that people know that their street and their house is what is going to be affected, and they need to pay attention. And it's not just everyone east of 95 needs to evacuate, because unfortunately that means lots of people say, well, they don't mean me. And so it's very important that we you know, explore what the right communication mechanism is, and how we describe it, I think is as you know, to the point of the question, critically important.
And I just want to add that we have a pending proposal with Coastal DNR to create basically a kind of an expert portal that would be fully integrated with SEMA's operations, for example, that might be modeled after something like they have in North Carolina with the dense sensor network across the state that flags flood levels, infrastructural vulnerabilities, critical infrastructure overlays. So we envision actually two levels of information synthesis and kind of flood information. One would be that expert kind of stakeholder emergency planner responder category, where they have access to very rich data sets for decision making and rapid response. And then a public portal, public-facing portal, where we could help people understand a full context for what their sensor and their you know, community is doing, right, relative to others, or relative to what the tidal predictions say. So those are very much a goal of the project, and we hope to be working on those in earnest starting very soon and going over the next 2 years.
Great, thanks so much. And she would love to coordinate. They can discuss how they did their statistical approach to define their sea level rise product.
Great.
Excellent.
And then Galen Scott, he is asking, can you tell us more about the methods used for surveying the sensors and the accurate land elevation? We have an NGS, I don't know what NGS stands for, NGS, Regional Geodetic Advisor, that could consult if needed.
Yes, we would love to coordinate on that. At this point, to date, the city and the county engineering teams have been doing the surveying as we install, and we reference it to the NAVD 88 datum, and basically they come out and we put a reference mark on the sensor itself on the box and say, please survey here, and they come out and do that as part of the installation, and we record it in the metadata related to that installation. But we would absolutely, and we already recognize we see some variations in that as we see more and more deployed, and we start to scratch our heads and wonder is you know, are these correct? And we need to make sure we have the right methodology in place to do that. So I think any recommendations and potential partnerships there are certainly welcome.
Great, thanks. And Galen replied, they will be replacing NAVD 88 and can help with methodology.
Yes, yes. Like all good standards, it's going to be replaced and updated at some point, right? So yes.
Perfect. And then we have another question. Where do you decide where to deploy the sensors?
Initially the project is focused on critical infrastructure like bridges, and that has been the initial target. We want, and because we're partnering with the broader community, we're trying to get coverage across Chatham County as part of this current project, and to do that not just in the easternmost coastal areas, but up in the rivers and the flood canals and other places throughout the county. From there, it's really about, and then also the next sort of piece of input to that is, okay, we have this modeling goal. How do we make sure that we have the data in the right places to provide the input we're looking for in the model? And for now, that means as many of these marsh areas and tributaries and inland rivers as we can possibly find a place to put a sensor. As we move forward with the much denser deployment, it'll be a lot more, once we've covered all the bridges, essentially, it'll be a lot more private docks and piers and things like that to reach those places.
Great, thanks. And seeing that it's 12:28, I'm going to take these last two questions. For the gateway portals, do you ask homeowners to place those on their houses?
We are considering that. We're absolutely interested in exploring that, both for the gateway infrastructure as well as for the sensors itself. We have only done that in sort of limited fashion so far, but we are definitely interested in, and Lala's going to actually, we have a sign up on our website if people want to volunteer and join the team. So
exactly. So we have our website, sealevelsensors.org, has a lot more information about what we discussed here, and specifically about hosting your own sensor. We're looking into that. So if you go to that website and go to the very bottom of the page where it says Get Involved, there's a form you can fill out about hosting a sensor or a gateway, and we're exploring that as an option.
And this might be a good opportunity to mention that we have a workshop coming up on March 27th down in Savannah at GT Savannah, and you can email us and get on our newsletter and keep informed of our events. But that's an opportunity for anybody who's going to be in the vicinity or even wants to view a live stream to catch up with the project updates and to sit with us as we design our workflow and our goals, and wrap our arms around resources that may be available locally, regionally. Those have been incredibly useful for us to really cement some of these key partnerships and incorporate all this rich information. So please do consider attending. It's really the early morning to mid-morning that those activities take place on March 27th at GT Savannah. So stay tuned and sign up for our newsletter on our webpage to stay informed about that.
Yeah, and if you want to send me that information, I could send it to those who registered too, and we can broadcast that for you, Kim.
Perfect, that'd be
and
great.
Then, awesome. We do have one final question. Are the sensors sensitive enough to pick up boats, wakes, and waves?
Yes, they're sensitive enough to pick up anything that goes underneath it, essentially. And so there is, but in particular with wave detection, we have been exploring that a little bit and have added that capability. We as part of power management, this is not a continuous feed, if you will, of data, so you're not going to see sort of that real-time difference between a boat wake and the calm water, but we will definitely pick up waves and give information on wave height, period, stuff like that as part of it. The sampling interval right now is on the order of we get a value from the sensor about every 5 minutes, and we can adjust that based on one of the nice things is we actually have the ability to push out when an event is coming. We can push out to the sensors and increase the sampling rate so that we can get a clearer picture, and then turn that back down after the event so that we can conserve the battery power.
Great, thanks so much. Seeing that it's 12:31, we're going to have to stop the webinar, but if we didn't get to your questions, please email communications@secoora.org, and I will pass them all off to the presenters. And then we'll also send an email about the March 27th workshop coming up, so you guys can be aware of that. And a recording of the webinar, along with the PDF of the slides, will be available on this web link right here, secoora.org/webinar-series. All right, thank you guys so much for presenting. That was a great presentation and a really interactive Q&A.
Thanks so much for having us. It was so much fun to learn from this group.
Awesome, and we'll definitely connect. And I took notes on who you need to reach out to or who wants to reach out to you, and I'll make sure you get those contacts.
Thank you.
Great, thanks everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday.
Bye.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.